only 9 Indians had more wealth than 50% of the Indian population. 9 people can actually come in an Innova, and they have more wealth than almost 65 crore people of this country. Level of inequality.
Thank you for joining Change and Possible, which is India's first Future Tech podcast. So, Mr. Amitabh Behr is the Chief Executive Officer at Oxfam India, a global civil society and an authority on tackling economic and gender inequality and building citizen participation. Mr. Behr currently serves as the Vice Chair of the Board of Civicus, a global alliance of civil society organizations and activists dedicated to strengthening citizen action in civil society across the globe. He also served on the board of several other organizations, including the Center for Budget and Governance Accountability and Indian Public Policy think tank. Really appreciate and honor to have you on the show. So let's
Thank you.
yeah. So could you share details on your organization Oxfam and what is it that your organization does?
All right. So thank you, Eddie, for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. And the idea that you're pursuing in terms of the dramatic changes we are seeing in terms of the interface between technology, people, society is fascinating. All the best to your endeavor. Oxfam is a confederation of 20 independent affiliates across 20 countries. And we work in almost 80 to 85 countries. Essentially, we have been working on, I would say, two pillars of work. One is the humanitarian pillar, in which we are immediately there as soon as a disaster hits. So in India, we've been in Kerala, Amphan, COVID. So just providing the humanitarian relief and rehabilitation that's needed for people and societies. The second piece is the developmental piece, in which we broadly work on ensuring people's rights, particularly socio-economic rights. So right to education, right to health, in the Indian context, the right to forest. But it is primarily around people's access to rights and also ensuring a broad justice framework within which we particularly look at questions of gender justice. In India, we've been working since 2008 as an independent entity. And we have worked on several pieces. So I'll not go into the details of the humanitarian relief. So we did work starting from Nepal to Kashmir, the Srinagar floods, to Chennai floods. So whenever there's flood, particularly in floods, we have a very strong response, particularly within that, looking at safe drinking water and water and sanitation. So that's the humanitarian piece. And on the other hand, we've been working on ensuring a discrimination-free India. That's our attempt. We are contributing to a people's movement in this country to end discrimination. So that's primarily the work we do. I can give you more details when we talk further.
Right. And so can you share more details on COVID right now? Because obviously we've been terribly impacted by COVID, especially the lower middle class families, they've been devastated, So can you share about some details of what are the efforts that Oxfam has done to tackle COVID?
Sure. So I would say that let me say that we have done that response in three different phases. The first response was the immediate response of ensuring relief to the people who are suffering because of COVID. And we know that the entire country, in fact, the entire globe has been suffering. But the support that we provided meant providing food for a month for almost 3 lakh plus people, both in the form of hot meals and in the form of dry ration. The second was we did provide the PPEs for the frontline health workers. And we ensured that we're going out of the big cities and reaching the frontline health workers, not just the doctors, but whether it's an A&M, a nurse, a health professional. So that's the second thing that we did. The third, which we did at a very significant scale, is with the state governments, in which we actually have reached almost 50 lakh people in helping them understand what is COVID, what is social distancing, which we keep saying, let's not call it social distancing, let's call it physical distancing and social solidarity. But we are just reaching out, helping people understand how do you quarantine a person, how do you respond, when do you take the person to a hospital, etc. So that's almost 50 lakh people, and this particularly in Orissa, in Uttar Pradesh with the State Disaster Management Authority. So that's the third big part of the response. So this is the immediate relief that we provided. Gradually moving on, we have also done the rehabilitation piece, in which we are particularly looking at cash transfers. As that a significant part of this country lost its livelihood.
Right.
So very small amount of even cash transfer, just a 5,000 does bring people back to their feet. And what it also does is it kickstarts the local economy as well, because some money comes in to that region. We have particularly done that in Bihar. So the second part is of the recovery. And the third part is, which is not directly related to the effect of COVID on individuals, but asking the larger systemic questions. So, for instance, let me just talk of 2-3 different pieces. One is the question of why is the public health system in India crumbling, and how can you improve the public health system? The second that we've been working on is the question of how people became very, very excited about online classes, but everybody knows in this country that still more than 80% children actually don't have access to internet or their internet phones. So the whole question of the digital divide that's come in. The third is how the gender-based violence has actually, particularly domestic violence, has increased post-lockdown. So, looking at different aspects where COVID is the trigger, but it has actually brought out the existing inequalities of our system or of the social structures we have. So those are the three, say, broad parts of our response to COVID.
I think gender-based violence, domestic violence, child violence, it's all gone up. And there's obviously COVID has a role to play over there because stress has gone up. And I think your cash transfer thing is extremely, extremely commendable. We will get into the public health and online classes out of the conversation later. So tell me, the recent FCRA government regulation, how has that impacted you? And what are your views on that policy?
The COVID response that I talked of was possible for us because we were working in 19 states with a large number of partners. As you know, that COVID actually did not allow any mobility, even for my own team members. So we had to rely on people who are on the ground. But with the new FCRA, we'll not be able to transfer any of the foreign support that we get for this developmental work to a smaller entity, even if they have an FCRA number. So that itself, the model of collaborative functioning will not now be a possibility. So that's a clear adverse impact. And there's several of these impacts. In terms of the larger question, I do think that it's not going to be helpful. The civil society is, to my mind and many of us, to believe that it is over-regulated, more regulated than many other sectors, probably most other sectors. Just let me tell you, I as an organization need to do my compliances with the company Ministry of Corporate Affairs, because we are registered as a not-for-profit company. If you're a trust, then you have to go to the firms, the registrar of firms and societies. Okay. The second is the income tax law. The third is the FCRA, which is the Ministry of Home Affairs, in which anyways, even before the amendment came, we had to every 15 days put all the money that was coming to us on the website. The fourth is then compliance of the donors who are bringing in the money. So it is really, I would say, unfortunate that we have made this work way more difficult. And there's no real good reasons for why this has been done.
Is there a body or a team of people trying to have a conversation with the government, talk to them, and say that this is us trying to create a better society, help people, and why such kind of policy? Are you guys having a conversation with the government regarding that?
So sure. So as in there are a lot of representations which have gone in to the government, but if you see that it happened very suddenly, and that was, again, we were surprised and deeply disappointed that in these times pre-legislative deliberations have become a norm. So you might remember, the environmental impact assessment norms, which were going to be changed. It came into the public domain. There was so much debate happening, but this really did not come to the public domain. It was introduced, and within 3 days, it became a law. So once it's a law, then deliberations are very, very limited. So that's again a disappointment. So what you're saying, as in a robust democracy, the expectation is that you have a discussion with the stakeholders. But that's not really happened. But we still made representations to the government, and one can only hope that it would listen to us sympathetically, at least in terms of the problems we are going to face. And it's not the organizations which will face the problems, because I truly believe that organizations can come and go, but the joint work these organizations were doing in helping the communities has been remarkable. And it is ultimately our own brothers and sisters who will suffer.
Right, right. So currently we are living in extreme inequality, right? And Oxfam has recently released a report called Time to Care, inequality report. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, we live in extreme inequality, as in I've been constantly saying this is obscene inequality. And totally morally unacceptable. Just to give you a data from 2 years ago, again from our own report, only 9 Indians had more wealth than 50% of the Indian population. Just imagine, just 9 people. Just to make it more pictorial, we've even been saying put them in an Innova. 9 people can actually come in an Innova, and they have more wealth than almost 65 crore people of this country. That's the level of inequality. This year, if you look at the data, the top 1% have 4 times more wealth than 73% of the Indian population. 4 times more wealth than 73% of the Indian population. So this level of dramatic inequality, obscene inequality, is unacceptable. And there's systemic causes for it. There are ways which must be addressed. It is interesting that globally everybody recognizes that inequality will lead to collapse of societies and countries. These levels of inequality, and that's what we're seeing around the world. You see a lot of unrest. It is also a reflection of the inequalities we have. But let me just add particularly this year's report, because this year our inequality, we also believe that the inequality is economic inequality, but it's not limited to economic inequality. It is also about multiple other dimensions of inequality. And this year we have focused on the unpaid care work of women and girls. So I will not exactly remember the data now, but in essence, it is men do household work which is probably less than 1/4 of what women do. And very often we'll see across societies, certainly in India, women's unpaid care work of taking care of the elderly, taking care of the sick in the family, getting fuel and fodder for the livestock they have, for their cooking, etc., sending children to school. All that is not taken care of. Cooking, cleaning, all that is not taken care of. And then often, these women actually go and do underpaid work also. So the entire economic system, the real engines of this economic system are these women who are getting underpaid or are doing unpaid care work. So that's the inequality we wanted to bring out.
So where do you see the problem? Is capitalism the problem? Uh, and do you see a equitable, fair future even possible?
We live in hope. The work I do will not survive for 2 days if you don't have hope. And that's why I'm here. I do believe that eventually human goodness would triumph. I do truly believe in what Martin Luther King said. Arc of history is long, but it does bend towards justice. So I truly believe in that, that we'll have to go through these struggles, but eventually the human project over centuries has been about making society better. Coming to your specific question, I would say yes. The kind of neoliberal capitalism that we are seeing, which is built around market fundamentalism, along with, say, patriarchy or the Brahminical society that we have in this country, all these are interwoven into each other and end up leading towards a way more unequal society. So yes, these are all factors in it.
Yeah, there is so many wrongs, and these wrongs have become something that we have completely chosen to ignore. Yeah, and every day the system is getting more and more darker, where it's sucking the life out of common people, the ones who are running the ecosystem. COVID, obviously, it's impacted everyone. The entire country is reeling. The lower class, lower middle class, the middle class population, the micro, small, medium-sized businesses. They all need help and support to, get back on their feet. But there is the Indian government, which has said that they've got an Atmanirbhar stimulus package, a 20 lakh crore. And so far, it seems 3 tranches of that has been released. But so far, from my perspective, I could be wrong, but it looks like it's all gone either to the banks or the big companies. Yes, the lower middle class people has been getting some ration, but this looks like more like the vote bank appeasement. So what are your views on the Atmanirbhar stimulus package? Is it just a PR gimmick from the government, and do they need to take a concrete effort to bring back the country on its feet?
So, see, I would not go as far as calling a package as a gimmick. Yeah. Anyways, that's not my place to comment on whether it's a gimmick or not. But what I can certainly say that it is inadequate, and we needed much more in terms of a response from the government, because what we are seeing is something that's not happened for almost a century. What we last saw in 1918. This is a disruption of unimaginable proportions. In that, the stimulus package should have been way stronger. And in terms of, particularly looking at questions of how would you address, one, the health crisis that we have. And I've earlier talked about it, but again to say that it's very clear that without the public health system becoming robust, we'll not be able to fight the entire COVID pandemic. Second, in terms of the question of livelihood, uh, I don't think, in a country where you have almost 92 to 93% in the informal sector, and this is, people debate about it. Somebody would say it's 89, somebody would say 92, 93, but everybody agrees that it's a phenomenally large number. And when you say informal sector worker, they don't have contracts, they don't have social security. These are people who should have been at the focus, at the center of the stimulus package. But that's not also come out clearly. It could have been done through way greater investments in agriculture and many other ways that were needed. So that's also been inadequate. So I would really say that we need a way bigger response at the moment for COVID. As in, we were all reading, and if you look at the ILO report, which came out a few months ago, it says that in India, almost 400 million people are on the verge of sliding back to poverty because of COVID. So all the gains we have made in the last 15, 20 years of getting people out of poverty is not going to, we will lose that. That's the ILO report. The other, which everybody is talking of, you're looking at a contraction of 23% of the Indian economy. And interestingly, mind you, our richest man has become richer. He has not lost money. So it is the poor who are losing resources. And therefore, it should have been a way bigger response and asking some very, very fundamental questions about how we are organized as an economy, as a society. How do we provide resources, health services to our people, education to our children? Yeah.
Right. So 23.9% the GDP contraction, that's a huge impact. And I mean, we talk about collective GDP, but nobody talks about per capita GDP. At this point in time, it ranks 142 number. Now, it's lower than Bangladesh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and Maldives, because I think they also have overtaken us. So where do you think we as a country are going wrong?
COVID is a time where we need to fundamentally reboot ourselves. And when, the possibility of us reimagining how India is organized, how societies are organized, is really available now, unfortunately, but there is that possibility. In that, I have been saying, and don't see me as a romantic, but and I'll explain why I'm saying that we need to move out of this GDP fundamentalism. GDP does not reflect anything, according to me. It is ultimately, again, are the wealthy becoming wealthier, an indication of that? Why can't we have, and that's why I'm saying don't take me as a romantic, because governments have actually taken on this role of look at Bhutan. It has moved from GDP to looking at what they call as the happiness index, which is a clear shift of what are the priorities of the country. And it is not just Bhutan, it is also New Zealand. Last year, the government actually moved towards what they're calling the well-being budget. So GDP is not critical. It's the well-being of their citizens, which is critical. So it is about fundamentally relooking at how do we evaluate our society's progress. It should be about ensuring everybody's dignity. Every individual should have dignity, and that dignity will only come when they have the basic rights of food, of shelter, of water, education, health. And that should really be the primary figure. It does hurt me to read that we get very excited about, we have added X number of billionaires in the last 5 years. That really doesn't help, at least the citizens and the country, men and women that I know in this country.
Right. Bhutan, happiness index, New Zealand, well-being budget. I think we need to completely relook at the system, because if you see at this point in time, we are so stressed out. The education system, IITs, there are students killing themselves, right? So we spoke about the public health. You said the public health in the industry is crumbling, and the education industry obviously is a problem. The rote learning is killing the education industry. What do you think should be done? Is technology? Do you think technology will play a role? Because suddenly, because of COVID, everyone is talking about digitization. Everybody is talking about adapting these new technologies. What role do you see technology playing in sorting out the education and the health industry space?
I always feel that technology is a huge aid, but cannot be the primary vehicle. Uh, in fact, we have seen how technology has often been used uh, as an instrument of oppression.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the unfortunate bit. It has tremendous potential, but look at what's happening now. That if you have the resources to give your child a laptop, then the child's education is probably not suffering. But while we just earlier talked of 93% being in the informal sector, do we really think that these people can expect uh, we can expect them to actually give laptops or smartphones to their children for hours with the internet costs that they have to do? That's not going to happen. So they're going to lag behind. And instead of us wasting time on just saying that we'll do online classes, we should have found alternative ways of doing it, which would have been COVID compliant, but also realistic in terms of what we could provide for our children. So, it's important. That's why I started. It can be a huge aid, but very often it becomes actually a way of monopolizing or even a tool of oppression. As in, we are now seeing what the entire social media is doing to the world. As in, there are enough studies now which are showing that the world is more divided after the social media has become so big, the post-truth world that we see around us. So what I would say is, let's not put our hopes squarely on technology. Technology is just a medium. We need the right commitment and the right perspective to ensure education or health. Just on, I talked of education. Let me just also talk of health. Isn't it devastating that you and I know, as you live in Mumbai, I live in Delhi. We know that from all over the world, people come for what is called medical tourism to this country. 5-star hotels, they have hugely comfortable stays with the best of the doctors, with the best of the technology. But this is a country which still has the highest number of malnourished children in our country. 1/3 of the global poor live in this country. And we are not able to provide basic health services to them. Really basic health services. Immunization is something that we have not been able to provide. We are the fourth, from the bottom, we are fourth in terms of investments in public health. So what is the point of having that fantastic technology with those brilliant doctors who are actually helping those super rich, whether from India or from outside? So nothing against technology. Technology is great. Let's embrace it, but embrace it with a perspective, with an understanding of how India functions.
Completely agree with you that technology is a double-edged sword. And at this point in time, obviously, there is Facebook with the Cambridge Analytica, and has obviously caused a lot of problem. But then if you see the other side, technology is that ray of hope which can actually take humans into a next evolution, because never in human history have we seen such exponential technology growth. We are at the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution, where humans are going to be redesigned technology is going to serve us. But yes, there is that larger voice which says that yes, the super rich are going to be served. Like for example, vaccines has come in, but yes, they are talking about who's going to get it first. And yes, those are the issues that we need to talk about and solve that right now. And there has to be the right commitment, which somehow I see lacking from the government. Healthcare and education, I believe, are basic rights. And we as a country, I think we are a great country. And if every single individual from the rural to the urban areas, if they are educated, we as a country can grow into a powerful nation. So yes, and I hope that technology plays that role somewhere. So you are also connected when you talk about the environment problem, right? So how deep is the global environmental problem today? Because there are a large section of people who are saying that we do not need a climate change but a complete system change. That's because capitalism and global warming are both completely interconnected. Capitalism as a system is highly exploitative of both people and the planet. It's driven by a desperate need for profit and hoarding. So, will the end of capitalism lead us to a zero carbon emission society?
Okay, so you've kind of said it for me that capitalism and the climate crisis are the two faces of the same coin, and we need to understand that. Let me just tell you that a couple of years ago I was in Fiji, and that's the time when it hit me really hard. If you don't stop the world from now, ensure below 2 degrees temperature rise, there would be no Fiji after 2035. And this is in 2017 or 18, I was there. So just, this is like real 15, 17 years story to actually understand the trauma and the pain they're going through, that they will not even survive as nations. They don't know what their future would be, where they would need to go. That's something which we have not understood, at least in this country. It is real, it is dramatic, and it's going to affect everyone, rich and poor, everyone. And we're still not taking adequate measures. And I live in a city where you must have seen, the pictures. It is really a gas chamber. Every morning when I wake up, particularly September, October, November, when it's really bad, I think, do I really need to raise my daughter in a city like Delhi? So, and all this, under this is the capitalist framework that we have. And that's where moving to, whether it's the wellness index, whether it's the happiness index, will help us. So consumption cannot be the marker of progress. It's a philosophical point, but if you don't make that shift, I don't think that Mother Earth will survive. It is not going to survive, and we're looking at a very, very bleak future. So technology also, I'm happy, and at least in the Sustainable Development Goals, if you see, that it's the first time we have an integrated framework where economic, social, and environment has been brought together. Otherwise, these were, parallel tracks happening. The second is, if you look at Goal 12, I'm very happy that, this is the first time they have started talking of the Goal 12 of the Sustainable Development Goals actually says we need to change the patterns of production. That's been discussed earlier, but it also says patterns of consumption. So that's something that we certainly need to work on. And let me just end again talking about the inequality within this. And people know it, but let me give you a hard data which will, actually give you a very clear understanding of the inequality within the climate crisis. I was going for a climate conference to Johannesburg. And it was interesting because it was a climate conference. It just said, tell us the location from where you would be flying, where would you fly to, and we'll give you the carbon emissions that your flight would do. And I did that from Delhi to Johannesburg. It's a flight via Dubai that I needed to take, so to and fro. And I fly economy, so it's not even a business class. Trust me, the carbon emissions that one flight for me from here to Johannesburg was, I think, 3 or 3.2 times higher than the annual carbon emissions per capita of Indians. So that's again something which we need to understand. It is again the top 2% of Indian population or the global population who are responsible for these emissions. The Adivasis in this country still live a carbon neutral life. They're the ones who are actually ensuring that the carbon sinks are protected. The forests are protected because of them. And on the other hand, we living in cities are the ones who are consuming. So these are very, very deep structural questions that if we don't address, and we don't have time, it is, it's not about future generations, it's about our own children. The next generation is going to ask these very, very tough questions of us.
This ignorance that we choose to clout ourselves by, I think if we do not make changes right now, we are getting into a world which could lead to a very dystopian future. So, for those philanthropists or good souls, companies who believe in the greater good, and if they're listening and if they want to connect with you, where and how they can connect with you?
I would be very happy to connect with anyone. If we can have a good conversation in terms of finding pathways of ensuring dignity, justice for everyone, to end discrimination. I'm very keen to have that conversation. People can reach us on our website. My email is fairly simple. It's amitabh@oxfamindia.org. So I'm happy to have that chat. But we do need to share both this understanding and the desire to find solutions. Otherwise, I'm happy to challenge people who actually would say that, no, it's great to have billionaires being added while people suffer in poverty and in indignity.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Amitabh. Really appreciate you taking time and sharing your insight. It's listening to you, I was shocked, terrified, but there's a deep down. I'm so affected because we living in this planet. It's just one planet, and it's terrible how we are treating the planet and those the people. It's just 1% of the global population of the elite which enjoys all the wealth. How badly is the distribution? I hope and I wish and I pray that the government, national leaders, and these billionaires come together and save this earth, because this is just one planet we have, and I'm sure, even if they open up their pockets a little bit, I think this world will be a much, much better place. So in that note, to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, please press the subscribe button. Until next time, see you guys. Bye bye. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Eddie.